Well, welcome to our homeschool segment. I wanted to do things a little differently today because I wanted to talk about some homeschool victories, 3 noteworthy court victories that have made homeschooling stronger. Because, here at the network, we're advocates of homeschooling. So let's just go through them a little bit to walk it out, because these things can affect you and how you take care of your children, if not now, in the future, and can also help remind you how to fight those that would try to come in and tell you otherwise. So what are they? The first one is the Sosebee case, which actually began about 2018 when Virginia's Franklin County School Board adopted a homeschool policy that even though school boards have no legal authority to regulate homeschooling, they got into it. The policy required parents to submit birth certificates and proof of residence of their homeschooled children, even though Virginia doesn't require either of those things. So Kirk and Kristen Sosebee, who were homeschooled themselves and now homeschooling their own children, actually objected to these extra legal requirements, and the school board threatened truancy proceedings on them. Well, in April, the Homeschool Legal Defense Association lawyer and homeschool graduate himself, Peter Kamakawawuli, I have no idea how to say his name, presented arguments to the Supreme Court by conference due to COVID. And Peter asserted that the board's policy violated state law. Not only had the board arrogated to itself the power to amend state status, but it had threatened to treat the law-abiding Sosebees as lawbreakers. And in June of 2020, the court unanimously agreed with us, declaring the school board's policies were illegal and unenforceable. So the Sosebee decision already helped defend homeschooling in other states just by that decision. That's why you need to know, because last month, the Maine Department of Education was messing with the family as well. And there was a lawsuit filed, and because of this, they looked back at the lawsuit and they backed off. So when somebody comes and says, hey, we require this of you and this of you, when it's not normal or it's not in the state law, you have grounds to fight that. And while the Sosebee case revolved around homeschooling, the next case we're going to talk about is the Curry case, which focused on the rights of families to be secure in the place where most homeschoolers homeschool, their own homes. Holly Kurz was reported to the Kentucky Cabinet for Health and Family Services when she briefly left her children unattended in the family van to go buy a box of muffins. When a child abuse investigator and sheriff's deputy showed up at her door the next day and threatened to remove her 6 children unless they allowed the officials to enter her home, Holly saw no choice but to step aside. By the way, folks, don't do that. The officials then strip searched the 6 children. Yeah. And HSLDA sued CHFS for this violation of homeschooling families' 4th and 14th Amendment rights. And in October, a federal judge said a jury could conclude that the defendants clearly violated the 4th Amendment. The judge actually wrote, Act 1, an attentive and loving mother gets muffins for her children. Act 2, there's a knock on her door and a threat by the government to take away her children. Act 3, her children are strip searched without cause. America's founding generation may never imagined a cabinet for health and family services, but they knew their fair share of unwelcome constables, and they added a 4th Amendment to our Constitution to protect against this 3-act tragedy. Wow. That's pretty strong language there. But our third case now, we're going to look at one more case. And it was resolved in October when a Texas Court of Appeals ruled that a judge had wrongly issued a court order requiring a homeschool family to allow a search of their home. The State Department of Children and Family had received a report that Matthew and Tabitha Berryman had put their infant in a closet to sleep, and the baby had cried excessively. So a DCF investigator spoke to Tabitha on the front porch of the family's home, where the investigator was able to see that the baby in question was healthy and safe. Tabitha further explained that the baby slept in a walk-in closet that had been converted into a nursery. That should have ended the matter, but it didn't. When the Berrymans declined to let the investigator into their home without a court order, she went to a judge and got one. So immediately LDA had to work fast. They filed a writ of mandamus with the appeals court, arguing that the order of entry was unjustified, along with the emergency motion to put the order on hold while the court considered the arguments. The appellate court granted emergency motion and ordered DSF investigation to stand down and explain why she had requested the order. This is what they said. It's not uncommon for a parent to place a baby on the floor to play or nap in a unanimous decision. And it's certainly not beyond the realm of reasonableness that a parent might convert a closet into a nursery, albeit a small one. While the state may legitimately interfere with family autonomy to protect children from genuine abuse and neglect, its responsibility to protect children from abusive parents does not authorize the state to oversee the internal affairs of every family. So that's 3 wins. And there was another one in Vermont recently too that had to do with procedure and things too. We don't have time for that. But guys, I like what Joe said last week. Whether it's concerning homeschool or anything else, do not let the government or the people into your home, period. Don't do it. Don't let them have access. And anyway, I want you guys to be aware that people do fight the system. And there's precedents that have been set that if we are knowledgeable, we can refer to those. We may need people to help. If it's homeschooling, the Homeschool Legal Defense Association is a great place to go if you are having to fight for homeschooling rights and situations. But you've got to stand up for your rights and say no. Don't allow the powers that be to run over you because you're lacking in your knowledge of the Constitution. And for that, I refer you to the Constitution show that we have here on this network so that you get informed.
Yeah, and the Homeschool Legal Defense is a good website to go to if you do not know your homeschool laws. Go there, because we had a situation here in Lucas County when I was back in the day, I was homeschooling, where the Lucas County Board of Education supervisor, we have to send paperwork in here in Ohio stating we're homeschooling. He sent a paper back to us stating, I give you permission. And us homeschoolers said, no. We called Homeschool Legal Defense. We said, this man is saying he gives us permission. There's nothing in the bylaws or the laws of the state stating that. We want it to just say, yes, we acknowledge that you're homeschooling. You do not give us permission. You do not have the authority to give us permission. And again, guys, do not let anybody into your home, because if you do, you have lost your rights in your own home. You do not. So many people do not even know. There's people out there that don't even know about homeschooling, what homeschooling is about. And when you say that you've homeschooled your child, they get fearful and think, oh, your child is caged up at home and they're not getting socialization and you're keeping them in the house away from the whole world. Well, guess what? More homeschoolers are more sociable than most public school kids that I have seen in my lifetime. And this is something that we need to stand up, and homeschoolers need to unify, especially homeschoolers that are believers.
Homeschoolers are all also not prone to peer pressure because they've not at such a young age been subject to the pecking order of this person or that person. And they actually interact on a more mature level. But all these cases that you mentioned, Sandi, comes back to the fact that if you don't know what the law says, if you don't know what's going on, they will take advantage of your ignorance.
Absolutely.
And that happens in more places than just homeschooling. We had a friend that, well, I'm not going to go into it, but anyway, it had to do, it was, they ended up letting them go because their mama went down there and she'd worked at the courthouse and she said, this is what the law says. Now, I'm not some ignorant person that doesn't know. And they came in and said, let them go. And it was just, they had not charged them with anything, but they had detained them. And they hadn't done anything that was wrong. So they will take advantage. And the big thing of it is, and I hear this from my son all the time, if you ever get stopped, don't say a word. because they say anything you say can and will be used against you. And that means they cut out a little snippet here and a little snippet there to make their point. But they can lie to you, but you can't lie to them. So it's all one-sided. You just really have to watch your P's and Q's.
Yeah.
Well, let me respond to all of this here. First of all, it's a wide statement to say don't ever say anything. You should always answer their questions, but you should always answer them as brief as possible. In other words, if you can give a yes or a no and answer their questions with yes or no, or if they ask you a question that requires more, just give at the least point you can. The second you don't answer anything, you're going to piss that guy off, and it's going to be 10 times worse than whatever it was. So you got to talk to them. You just got to be. Go ahead, Sandy.
The lawyers we've been using say do not, because they're already PO'd at you, because they will manipulate it. When they've targeted you, they already can. You're not guilty. You're not innocent until proven guilty anymore in this society. You're guilty until they can manipulate the system to prove that you are really, really guilty, even though you're innocent. And so they say, because of the manipulation and how they twist and shake things, they say don't answer a thing they say. Shut your mouth. But that again is a different perspective. Maybe that's just around here in Texas. I don't know.
It depends on the circumstances as well. My son-in-law is a trooper, state trooper, and he'll tell you it depends on the circumstances of the situation. If we're pulling you over for something and it doesn't look like that the guy is in a bad mood or something, yeah, go ahead, answer the questions and everything. But if you see that the officer looks like he's a little bit pissy, because some of these officers have had a bad day and they take it out on you, then you got to kind of take it by the situation. You got to be careful with the situation. Each cop is different.
Roadblocks where they look at your insurances. I don't mind doing that, and I have to show my carry permit. I have a funny story about that, but anyway, that was you have to show that because they know immediately whether you have one or not. If you don't, you're suspect. But if they want to just search your car just for whatever they want, no, they have to have reasonable cause. So it's like, I'm glad you said that, Mark, because I didn't mean that as a blanket statement to everyone.
Yeah, that's
it depends on the circumstances. You're exactly right. Yeah.
Let me just tell you, and we're going to address a couple of things on the Constitution here, because you brought it up and you mentioned it, and I'm going to take that to the next level. But first of all, let me tell you, in every single state and in every community, if you don't cooperate with authorities, you have just broken the law right there. Okay, cooperate doesn't mean you have to give your life story to them. But once again, you're on the side, you're the defense side, you are the one that can control the situation if you want to. That's why I say always give a yes and no answer. At least cooperate to the point where you don't cause it to go even worse and make it a worse situation than what it is. But yeah, if you don't at least give them a yes and no answer, then you can be arrested for not cooperating with them. But the second you answer yes or no, I'm going to go to the next one. You mentioned the writ of mandamus. Okay, the writ. It's interesting. Thank you very much for giving a promotion for contemplating the Constitution, because just yesterday the entire show was on the writ of habeas corpus, which works with the writ of mandamus. Does anybody know what a writ of mandamus is? You mentioned it in your little spiel there.
I read it.
Yeah, that's right. And also, does anybody know what the writ of habeas corpus is? And if you don't, you need to go listen to the show yesterday, because it involves you today, and it will involve you in the future by everything that's happening, out these windows here. First of all, writ of mandamus gives you the right to stop proceedings, legally stop whatever they're doing outside the court and inside the court. All you have to do is say, if something is happening that's wrong, all you have to do is say writ of mandamus, period. And it should stop them right there, because that is the same as you're being arrested and say, I want a lawyer. It's saying exactly the same thing. Because when you say writ of mandamus, then that means I want to stop all proceedings right now until I get somebody with me that has legal authority to tell me what can happen. And they should have to stop. So the writ of habeas corpus is once you are, and Sherry used the word detain, once you are detained, arrested, however you want to put it, you can say writ of habeas corpus. Writ of habeas corpus means you have to, I don't care if it's 3:00 in the morning, you can say writ of habeas corpus and they have got to stop everything. And as soon as they can get a judge and get a court open, they have to prove why they prove it. They have the arresting officer or any officer has to prove why you have been detained, and they have to give that proof. They say, well, we can hold you for 24 hours. That's the biggest bunch of BS there is, because they have to be able to prove while they are holding you for 24 hours. And it's called a writ of habeas corpus. But the problem is that us dumbos out here, we don't know this stuff. See? But so there's two things that are actually in the Constitution right there. We're talking about, I'm going to just tell you, Article 1, Section 9, Clause 2, writ of habeas corpus will stop everything. And writ of mandamus will stop. So what you were talking about, Sandi, brings out a really good point. But there are a lot of things out there that are for your favor in their constitutional rights that we just don't know, because we don't know our Constitution. And you know who else doesn't know the Constitution? Is the police officers.
It's true.
The judges.
And the lawmakers.
Lawmakers are supposed to. Actually, I put out, and Abigail and I actually brought up the fact that I think in the same way that the kings of Israel were supposed to write out an entire Torah because they're the king of Israel, I think that every person from in office, from judge to the president, should have to write out the Constitution in handwriting and make it public so everybody can see that they wrote it out and they know what it says. That's my point. So,
Larry.
Yeah. How would you like to enter into this discussion?
Well,
you could bring is vital to us, brother.
First of all, there's very little information about what goes on in the courts against homeschooling. I mean, teachers have no idea what goes on. Teachers' attitudes towards homeschooling are, that's another person taken out of my classroom. And if enough of them leave, there's my job security. So it's always about that. And
so they're going to be instantly negative towards it.
Definitely, yeah. Against charter schools, that's the biggest thing that I heard all the time from the administration, that those evil charter schools are taking more kids away from us. That's more funds away from us. And what are they doing with that money? You know, before I was in the public schools, last 22 years I was in public schools. I taught 7 years in Christian school. So I'm aware of the different curriculums that are out there. And when homeschoolers came to me when I was in the public school, we were able to cooperate because I knew the curriculums. In North Carolina, they have to take EOG, end of grade test every year. So the homeschoolers would show up at the end of the year when the rest of the students that I taught were taking the EOGs, they would come and take it too. And they would always score higher than most of my kids. And I attributed that to the curriculum and to the dedication of the parents. So that's why I'm positive toward charter schools. I'm positive toward homeschooling too, because I see the results. And the public school classroom has changed over the last 22 years, let alone the 42 years that I've been in education. And it's not been positive. It's been negative.
What are some of the negative things that you've seen?
Examples, if you can think of any. Right.
Well, simply the turnaround of what is being, who has the power in the classroom. I mean, the administration, and I don't know whether this is negative or positive, the administration will back up a parent's complaint, and the teacher's always kind of walking on eggs what they're doing. And what that leads to is the strict adherence to the curriculum that is given to us. And there's no leeway. And the curriculums that have been coming down have been changed also. The most recent, in the spring of this year, I was given a survey upon the new social studies curriculum that's coming out. And one of the things that's been added is gender studies to the social study curriculum.
Yeah.
And when I read that, it was like,
wow.
In middle school age kids, give me a break. And so, I was negative on that survey, but that's what's coming down the line. And if the new teachers want to keep their job, they have to teach that. Uh-huh. And there's no leeway.
Teach it, not just bring it up and talk about it at one class. Yes. It's literally taught. The LGBT, the gender, gender, whatever it is actually taught.
Right.
I will say this, Larry, to what you said about the parents have more rights than the teachers, and et cetera, et cetera. In the school system, my sister is a middle school math teacher, and she says the same thing. She said that the system will back the parents, and she's been punched by a kid before, mm-hmm. and things like. Now she is a former Army person who did Desert Storm, so she's intimidating. She can be, but she says the very same things, and she hates it. Of course, we know that the Muslim Brotherhood is in charge of a lot of the textbooks that are coming out and curriculum that's coming out, which is really, really bad. Right. Really, why are we doing that? But she says she doesn't even, she hates teaching in the system. Mm-hmm. She abhors her job. And she said, because it's so crooked, and she sees where it's going, not only with teachers via parents, via the administration, but in even what they're having to teach. Like you said, the kids, you're teaching to a test. You're not actually teaching. The kids are leaving without skills, et cetera, because the teacher's hands are tied.
And here's a dirty little secret too. The EOGs are not necessarily geared to evaluate the student. They're there to evaluate the student, the teacher. I'm sorry. Our being rehired depends upon our test scores. So it puts the teacher in the point where they are absolutely teaching the test. Because if your kids don't come back with good grades at the EOG, they'll get passed on. I mean, that's a lie that's been promulgated for 15 years, that if you don't pass the EOG, you're not going to, they get passed on. But the teacher is reprimanded and put on a special program in order to improve their teaching. I did not necessarily stay to the curriculum. As a result, my test scores weren't always the greatest. And I, a 40-year teacher, was on the brink of being put on one of these programs because I was not teaching what they wanted to be taught.
Wow.
So you're saying it's almost like being a factory
absolutely,
worker
yes.
kind of
Yes.
attitude. That's pretty sad. One of my questions is with social studies over the years, have you seen a change where the history has been removed? Like when I was a kid in the 80s, they had civics class in high school, and the civics class pretty much was, they taught us about the presidents and they taught us how to vote. They never taught us about the Constitution or the amendments or anything of that sort. Do you see that when you were over the years, how that's changed?
I did not teach high school social studies.
Right, just the junior high social studies. Did you
Right.
see anything that was removed for the historical aspect of kids not getting that information that they need when they get to the adult stage?
Well, let me explain this. Social studies has been put on the back burner for the last 25 years.
Mhm.
Math and language arts is the big push because that's what the EOGs are in. Okay. So social studies teachers per se are not being hired. What you have in the public school system is a language arts teacher or a math teacher who also teaches social studies.
Wow.
They have not been trained in social studies, but because of the quote lack of funds, because of the schools shrinking in population, they're not hiring new teachers. They're just giving new assignments to teachers. So you have a math teacher who also has to teach a couple courses in social studies. So what do? They depend upon the curriculum.
The book, yeah.
They depend upon the textbook.
Mm-hmm.
They don't bring anything else in. They don't have time to.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the biggest story. I was the only social studies teacher in my entire county that was trained to be a social studies teacher. All the rest of the schools had, and you teach social studies.
Sherry.
A couple of comments kind of going back when you first started, you were talking about how much they're paid for each student through the government and everything. We had a situation in the family years ago, a couple of our cousins, and one cousin, the younger cousin, they were like a year apart. The younger cousin had done everything but junior and senior English, and he wanted to take junior and senior English together, and he could go ahead and graduate. He'd already passed enough on the PSATs or whatever them numbers are, SATs, that he could already get into college. And they refused to let him take both of those together. And so he said, I'm not spending another whole year in school over one subject. And he just dropped out of school, took his GED, went on with his brother to the university, and he's a doctor of polymer chemistry.
Wow.
The reason that they gave him for not allowing him to do that was because they would lose what they paid for him. They had to have so many kids.
Mm-hmm.
That was it wasn't what was best for him.
Right.
It was a whole issue. And then we had another, going back to the LBGT, the alphabet people. I call them the alphabet people. A friend of mine's little girl's in kindergarten, and they went to something for the kids, they were putting on, had the all kinder, and they kept looking at this. They're going like, and so they said, who is that over there? And the little girl looked at him and said, well, she used to be a girl, but now she's a boy. She's a he.
Right.
And I said, really? In kindergarten? She
In
said,
kindergarten. Yeah.
she's going like, what? That is, now you talk about taking kids out of homes. Them's the people that needs to have their kids taken away.
Yeah.
from.
Right.
Well,
Well,
that's exactly
I wanna-
the parents.
Right.
The other thing that I wanted to bring up was I've looked at my granddaughter is hugely intelligent, and she's in the school system. And they have what they call bell ringers, and they have to read this stuff, and then they have to read a book and do a book report. And I said, let me see the book you're looking at, because she's acing everything. It was the most dumbed down book I've ever seen, and the subject matter was ridiculous. And she's like, whatever. And I'm going like, you need to be reading this. Here, let's read it, because we've read to her ever since she's a baby. And she's like, yeah, Grammy, I know. She said, it's just, there's no prose in it. There's no real nice structure. The stuff that they give them is ridiculous. And I'm going like, this will make your brain mush. Yeah. That one. And then the last point I was going to make was history, about changing history. They have changed history. They have changed history about the reason the Civil War was fought. The reason the Civil War was fought was not over slavery. That was a side issue. They had and I'm not for slavery. Don't get me wrong. Don't anybody start sending a lot of letters to Mark about me just because I'm in the southern states. We know why it was fought, and it was over economics. It was over cotton. It was industry. They had all the cotton mills up north, and they wanted to pay us nothing for our cotton. So we decided to send it over to England. That had a lot to do with it. And it was really over states' rights, which is part of the Constitution. It was really over states' rights. Slavery was a side issue, and they wanted to do that to break the back of the South, because all of our labor was slave labor. Like I said, I'm not for slavery. Right. I'm glad it was ended. Okay. But they need to set the history books right. We've got letters talking about the cotton and everything in our family. So a lot of the roots in history, they have changed to meet their agenda today.
Yes. And that's across the board. It's good points.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussion, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the MessianicLambRadio.com website. I'm Susan Hoogie, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.